I saw them, the HOA. 3 of them, clad in their khaki uniforms and looking like they're on a mission from beige hell, probably. And they're carrying a chainsaw. A chainsaw. They're walking towards my tree, my magnificent, glorious oak tree, and they're looking at it like it's some kind of enemy, like it's a rogue dandelion that needs to be eradicated. I freeze. I can't believe what I'm seeing. This can't be happening. They wouldn't, would they? They stop at the base of the tree, rev the chainsaw, and that's when the red mist descends. I'm not usually a violent person. I'm more of a passive-aggressive, witty retort kind of guy. But seeing those HOA goons with their chainsaw and their smug expressions about to butcher my tree, something inside me just snapped. It was like a switch flipped. Shock turned to disbelief. Disbelief turned to anger, and anger. Well, anger turned into a primal urge to protect my tree. My beautiful, magnificent, irreplaceable oak tree. This tree is a legend. Old, wise, and beautiful, it's been the centerpiece of my front yard for as long as I can remember. It's practically a member of the family. It provides shade in the summer, a riot of color in the fall, and a home for countless squirrels and birds. It's my tree. I leaped off the porch, yelling something unintelligible, probably something along the lines of, "Get away from my tree." I charged at them, a man possessed, ready to defend my leafy friend with my bare hands if necessary. I'm pretty sure I looked like a crazy person, a tree-defending, crazy person. They stopped, startled by my sudden appearance and my enthusiasm. They looked at me, then at the tree, then back at me, their faces a mixture of surprise and... Was that fear? Good. They should be afraid. "What do you think you're doing?" I yelled, my voice shaking with rage. "Get away from my tree! Get away from it now!" They mumbled something about neighborhood aesthetics and unruly vegetation, but I wasn't listening. I was too busy seeing red. All I could think about was protecting my tree. My beautiful, magnificent oak tree. And those HOA goons, they weren't going to touch it. Not on my watch. They weren't going to get away with this. They weren't going to touch my tree. Not on my watch. The red mist was still swirling. My protective instincts were on high alert, and I was ready to unleash the full force of my petty revenge. Clean aesthetic, they'd said. Unruly vegetation. They wanted to chop down my beautiful oak to make it fit their sterile vision of suburban perfection. Fine. They wanted clean aesthetic. I'd give them clean aesthetic. But it wasn't going to be the kind they were expecting. As I stood there, glaring at them, a brilliant, ridiculous, utterly perfect idea sparked in my mind. If they wanted to mess with my tree, I'd give them something to really complain about. Something so over the top, so audacious, so utterly unruly that it would make their heads spin. A treehouse, not just any treehouse, a luxury treehouse, a massive, multi-level canopy castle complete with lights, a balcony, maybe even a spiral staircase. A treehouse so grand, so magnificent, so utterly ridiculous that it would become a local landmark. A giant, leafy middle finger to the HOA and their clean aesthetic. It was perfect. Absolutely perfect. It was petty, it was excessive, it was exactly the kind of clean aesthetic the HOA deserved. They wanted to chop down my tree? Fine. I'd turn it into the most talked about, most envied, most unruly structure in Willow Creek Estates. They wanted a clean aesthetic? I'd give them a clean aesthetic, a clean, tree-filled aesthetic. The chainsaw goons were still standing there, looking a little nervous. They probably sensed the shift in my demeanor. The primal rage was subsiding, replaced by something even more dangerous. A plan. A glorious, treehouse-shaped plan. I smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile that probably sent shivers down their spines. "You know," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "I've been thinking. This tree, it's a bit underutilized, don't you think? I've decided to make some improvements." They exchanged nervous glances. They probably thought I was going to build a birdhouse or something. They had no idea what I had in store for them. They had no idea that their attempt to cut down my tree had just unleashed the beast. the treehouse beast, and it was going to be magnificent. Okay, so Operation Treehouse was a go. I needed an architect, not just any architect. I needed an architect who was willing to embrace the, shall we say, unconventional nature of my project. An architect who wouldn't just build a treehouse, but who would build a luxury treehouse. A treehouse so grand, so magnificent, so utterly ridiculous that it would make the HOA's heads spin. I started my search online, naturally, browsing websites, looking at portfolios, trying to find someone who seemed open-minded, someone who wouldn't just laugh at me when I told them my idea. And then I found her, Sarah. Her website showcased her work, modern, innovative designs with a focus on incorporating natural elements. 1. She even had a few projects that involved treehouses. Smaller ones, sure, but treehouses nonetheless. She seemed like my kind of architect. I called her up, explained my situation, the HOA, the tree, the chainsaw incident, the whole shebang. She listened patiently, her initial surprise gradually turning into intrigue. A treehouse around the entire tree? She asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and excitement. Exactly, I said, a big one, a luxury one, with all the bells and whistles. There was a pause. Then she chuckled. I'm in, she said. That was music to my ears. We met a few days later, at my house, naturally. She stood there, gazing up at my magnificent oak, her eyes wide with appreciation. This tree is incredible, she said. It's perfect. I told her my vision. A multi-level treehouse with a balcony, maybe a spiral staircase, custom lighting, the works. I wanted it to be like a small house, nestled amongst the branches. A canopy castle. She was enthusiastic. She loved the challenge. She started sketching ideas, incorporating the tree's unique shape and size into the design. She talked about using sustainable materials, about maximizing natural light, about creating a space that felt both luxurious and connected to nature. The design process was amazing. She was brilliant. She understood my vision perfectly. She came up with ideas I hadn't even thought of. We spent hours poring over blueprints, discussing materials, tweaking the design. It was like being a kid again, planning the ultimate treehouse. She incorporated the tree's massive trunk into the treehouse design, making it the central support structure. The branches became part of the architecture, weaving through the rooms, creating a sense of being truly immersed in the tree. It was ingenious. The treehouse was going to be, well, it was going to be epic. A masterpiece of architecture, a testament to my love for my tree, and a giant middle finger to the HOA. It was perfect, absolutely perfect. And Sarah? She was just as excited about it as I was. We were going to build something truly special. Something that would make the HOA's head spin. And something that would make my tree even more magnificent than it already was. Okay, so we had the design. Sarah, my amazing architect, had created a masterpiece. A luxury treehouse so grand, so magnificent, so utterly ridiculous that it would make the HOA's heads spin. But there was one small hurdle to overcome before we could start building. Permits. Ah, permits. The bane of every homeowner's existence. The bureaucratic red tape that can turn even the simplest project into a nightmare. And I knew that the HOA wasn't going to make this easy. They were going to fight me every step of the way. So I prepared. I knew I had to be meticulous. I knew I had to dot every I and cross every T. I knew that any small mistake, any tiny oversight, would give the HOA an opening to shut down my project. I went to the city planning department, armed with Sarah's blueprints, detailed specifications, and a healthy dose of patience. I talked to the permit clerks. I talked to the building inspectors. I talked to anyone who would listen. I explained my project, emphasizing its safety, its sustainability, and its adherence to all building codes. The permit process was an experience. It was a bureaucratic maze filled with forms, fees, and endless waiting. I had to get permits for everything: building permits, electrical permits, plumbing permits, yes, even for a treehouse. You name it. It was like trying to navigate a jungle of red tape. And, as expected, the HOA tried to interfere. They sent letters to the planning department claiming that the treehouse was unsafe, unsightly, and a violation of neighborhood aesthetics. They even tried to argue that it violated some obscure zoning ordinance about excessive canopy coverage. Seriously? They pulled out all the stops. They called in favors, they made complaints, they even tried to attend the permit hearings, armed with their concerned citizen personas and their endless supply of petty grievances. But I was ready for them. I had anticipated their every move. I had all my paperwork in order, every regulation met, every box checked. I had Sarah's architectural plans, stamped and approved by licensed engineers. I had letters from arborists confirming the health and stability of the tree. I even had a scale model of the treehouse, just to demonstrate its, shall we say, harmonious integration with the surrounding environment. I presented my case calmly and methodically, addressing every single one of the HOA's objections with facts, figures, and a healthy dose of sarcasm. I pointed out the absurdity of their claims, the pettiness of their grievances, and the sheer lack of any legitimate grounds for denying my permits. And, much to their dismay, I won. The city planning department, after reviewing all the evidence, approved my permits, every single one. The HOA's attempts to block my project had failed, miserably. It was a victory. A small victory, perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. And it was a crucial victory, because now nothing could stop me. The treehouse was going to be built, and the HOA, they were going to have to watch it happen. Brick by brick, board by board, nail by nail, my luxury treehouse was going to rise, and there was nothing they could do about it. Okay, permits in hand, it was time for the main event: construction. And this wasn't your average backyard treehouse we're talking about. This was a luxury treehouse, a multi-level canopy castle, a testament to my love for my tree and my utter disdain for the HOA's clean aesthetic. The construction was, well, it was an epic undertaking. It was a massive project, involving cranes, scaffolding, and a whole team of skilled carpenters, electricians, and plumbers. It was like building a small house, only in a tree. The scale of the project was mind-boggling. The treehouse was designed to wrap around the massive oak trunk with multiple levels branching out into the canopy. It was huge. It dwarfed the other houses in the neighborhood. It was magnificent. The first step was building the support structure. Massive beams, carefully engineered and secured to the tree trunk, formed the foundation of the treehouse. It was like building a platform in the sky. A very, very large platform. Then came the walls, the floors, the roof. Sustainable materials, chosen for their beauty and durability, were used throughout the construction. The treehouse was designed to blend seamlessly with its surroundings, using natural wood finishes and large windows to maximize natural light. The features of the treehouse were, well, they were luxurious. There were multiple levels, connected by a winding spiral staircase. There was a spacious balcony overlooking the neighborhood, perfect for enjoying a morning coffee or an evening cocktail. There was custom lighting, both inside and out, creating a warm and inviting ambiance. And yes, there was even a small kitchenette and a bathroom. Because why not? If you're going to build a luxury treehouse, you might as well go all out. The construction process was fascinating to watch. Cranes lifted massive beams into the air. Carpenters hammered away at the walls. Electricians wired the intricate lighting system. It was like watching a giant puzzle being put together piece by piece. And the tree? It was the centerpiece of it all. The branches wove through the rooms, creating a sense of being truly immersed in the tree. The leaves provided shade and privacy. The tree was incorporated into the design, not just as a support structure, but as an integral part of the treehouse itself. It took months, but finally it was finished. My luxury treehouse, my canopy castle, my giant, leafy middle finger to the HOA. It was everything I'd dreamed of and more. It was magnificent. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. And the HOA, they were losing their minds. Okay, so the treehouse was rising. Slowly but surely, my canopy castle was taking shape. A magnificent multi-level structure nestled amongst the branches of my oak tree. And the HOA? Well, let's just say they weren't exactly thrilled. Their reactions were predictable. Outrage, disbelief, and a desperate scramble to find some way to stop the project. They were losing their minds. Mrs. McMillan, the HOA president, was leading the charge, naturally. She was apoplectic, incandescent. She was practically foaming at the mouth. I'd see her pacing around my yard, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury, muttering to herself about property values and neighborhood aesthetics. She looked like she was about to have a stroke. She sent me letters, of course. Official-looking letters, filled with legal jargon and threats of fines and legal action. She claimed the treehouse was unsafe, unsightly, and a blatant violation of every single rule in the HOA handbook. She even tried to argue that it was a fire hazard. Seriously, a treehouse, a fire hazard? She called the city planning department, trying to get my permits revoked. She called the building inspectors, trying to find some kind of code violation. She even tried to rally the other HOA members, urging them to join her crusade against my treehouse. But it was no use. My permits were in order, my construction was up to code, and my treehouse was perfectly legal. Mostly. There was nothing she could do. And the neighbors? Their reactions were the opposite of the HOA's. Initially, they were shocked, of course. They'd never seen anything like it. A massive treehouse rising up in the middle of the neighborhood? It was unconventional, to say the least. But then the shock turned into amusement, and then the amusement turned into excitement, and then the excitement turned into appreciation. They started to see the beauty of it, the craftsmanship, the ingenuity, the sheer audacity of the project. They started to see it as a symbol of rebellion against the HOA's tyranny, a symbol of creativity and individuality, a symbol of just not taking things too seriously. The treehouse became a local attraction. People would drive by just to get a glimpse of it. Kids would point and whisper in awe. Adults would chuckle and shake their heads, marveling at its sheer size and its presence. It became a source of community pride. My neighbors started to see it as their treehouse, a unique and special feature of their neighborhood. They even started throwing treehouse parties, bringing food and drinks and celebrating the, shall we say, unconventional addition to Willow Creek Estates. And the HOA? They were seething. They were furious. They were losing their minds. And the more they tried to stop it, the more popular the treehouse became. It was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Their attempts to shut it down only made it more desirable, more talked about, more legendary. Okay, so the treehouse was built, the neighbors were thrilled, and the HOA, they were still fuming. They couldn't stop it, they couldn't tear it down, but they weren't going down without a fight. Their next tactic? The unruly argument. They sent me another letter, naturally. This one was even more ridiculous than usual. It claimed that the treehouse was too unruly and violated the neighborhood's clean aesthetic. Unruly? Seriously? It was a treehouse. A magnificent, custom-built, architect-designed treehouse. It wasn't like it was a giant, inflatable, bouncy castle shaped like a clown, although that would have been pretty awesome. They argued that it was too big, too tall, too tree-housey. They claimed it disrupted the harmony of the neighborhood and detracted from the overall aesthetic appeal. They even used the phrase arboreal monstrosity. Seriously? An arboreal monstrosity. It was a treehouse, not a Godzilla-sized tree-eating monster. I chuckled. They really thought they could get away with this? They were grasping at straws, desperate to find some way to justify their hatred of my magnificent treehouse. I responded with a letter of my own, naturally. Polite, but firm. And dripping with sarcasm, naturally. I attached copies of my architectural plans,
stamped and approved by licensed engineers. I included copies of my permits, showing that the treehouse was perfectly legal. I even included photos of the treehouse, highlighting its, shall we say, harmonious integration with the surrounding environment. While I appreciate the HOA's artistic critique of my treehouse, I wrote, I'd like to point out a few things. Firstly, the treehouse is built on my property, with all necessary permits and approvals. Secondly, I'd like to remind the HOA that the term clean aesthetic is subjective and open to interpretation. And thirdly, I added with a wink, I believe the treehouse actually enhances the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood. It's quite striking, don't you think? I finished the letter with a cheerful "Have a nice day," and sent it off. The HOA, predictably, didn't respond. They were stumped. They couldn't argue with permits, they couldn't argue with architectural plans, and they certainly couldn't argue with the, shall we say, uniqueness of my treehouse. And then the irony, the delicious karmic irony. The treehouse, which the HOA claimed was going to destroy property values, actually started to increase property values.
Real estate agents started advertising Willow Creek Estates as a treehouse community. They highlighted the unique and desirable nature of the neighborhood, emphasizing the presence of my magnificent treehouse. People were actually moving to the neighborhood because of the treehouse. It was becoming a local landmark, a symbol of community pride, and a major selling point for real estate agents. The HOA, of course, was furious. They were caught in their own trap. Their attempts to destroy my treehouse had backfired spectacularly. It had become so popular, so beloved, so valuable, that they couldn't touch it. They were stuck with it, and they knew it. It was poetic justice at its finest. Okay, so the treehouse was a hit. It was increasing property values, attracting new residents, and generally making the HOA look like a bunch of, well, let's just say unhappy people. They'd tried the unruly argument. They'd tried to claim it was a fire hazard. They'd even tried to argue that it was an arboreal monstrosity. But nothing worked. My permits were in order. My construction was up to code, and the treehouse was undeniably awesome. So, the HOA, realizing their mistake, decided to take a different approach. If they couldn't get rid of my treehouse, they'd just make sure no one else could have one. They decided to change the rules. They called a special meeting, a meeting of the minds, as Mrs. McMillan so dramatically put it. The agenda? Adding a new section to the HOA bylaws, specifically a section that would ban large treehouses. They were going to close the treehouse loophole once and for all. They sent out flyers. They put up signs. They even went door to door, trying to rally support for their anti-treehouse crusade. They painted my treehouse as a dangerous, unsightly, and property value-destroying monstrosity. They were pulling out all the stops. They were confident, of course. They assumed that the residents would be on their side. After all, who would want a neighborhood full of giant treehouses? It would be chaos, an arboreal apocalypse. But they underestimated the power of, well, of a really awesome treehouse. The day of the special meeting arrived, and the clubhouse was packed. Everyone in Willow Creek Estates was there. The Karen contingent, clutching their pearls and muttering about property values, were firmly on the HOA's side. But then there were the others, the ones who had fallen in love with the treehouse, the ones who appreciated its beauty, its uniqueness, and its contribution to the community. The ones who saw it as a symbol of rebellion against the HOA's tyranny. They were the silent majority, the treehouse lovers. And they were about to make their voices heard. Mrs. McMillan, looking like she was about to lead a charge against a flock of feathered fiends, or in this case, a flock of leafy treehouses, took the stage. She gave a passionate speech about the importance of neighborhood aesthetics, the dangers of unauthorized arboreal structures, and the threat that large treehouses posed to the very fabric of Willow Creek Estates. It was all very dramatic. Then it was time to vote. And that's when the magic happened. One by one, the residents cast their ballots, and one by one, the votes went against the rule change.
The Karen contingent was stunned. They couldn't believe it. Their carefully crafted plan to ban treehouses was crumbling before their very eyes. But the treehouse lovers had spoken. They'd seen the light, or rather, the leafy canopy. They'd realized that life is too short to worry about perfectly manicured lawns and clean aesthetics. They'd embraced the treehouse. And so, the HOA was defeated, again. Their attempt to change the rules had backfired spectacularly. They were stuck with the treehouse. And more importantly, they were stuck with the idea of treehouses. The seed had been planted. The treehouse revolution had begun. Okay, so the HOA was trying to pull a fast one, attempting to ban future treehouses after the fact. They'd called their special meeting, confident they had the votes. They were so wrong. So wrong. The residents of Willow Creek Estates had fallen in love with my treehouse. It wasn't just a structure. It was the structure. It was beautiful, unique, and it had become a symbol of not putting up with HOA nonsense. They appreciated the craftsmanship, the sheer audacity of it all, and the fact that it made their neighborhood interesting. It had character, something Willow Creek Estates desperately lacked before, and they weren't about to let the HOA take that away. The vote was a landslide, a resounding no to the proposed rule change. The Karen contingent looked shocked, their faces a mixture of disbelief and outrage. They couldn't believe their perfect plan had backfired so spectacularly. They were so used to getting their way, so accustomed to enforcing their petty rules, that they'd completely misjudged the mood of the neighborhood. But the residents had spoken, loudly and clearly. They loved the treehouse, and they weren't going to let the HOA ruin it for everyone. And that wasn't all. The HOA's overreach, their constant meddling, their obsession with control, it had finally reached a tipping point. The residents were fed up. They were tired of the petty rules, the endless letters, the constant threats. They were tired of being told what they could and couldn't do with their own property. So, along with voting down the treehouse ban, they did something else. Something even more satisfying. They voted the entire HOA board out of office. Mrs. McMillan and her cronies were ousted. Their reign of beige terror was finally over. They were replaced by a new board. A board that actually listened to the residents. A board that understood the importance of not being a bunch of power-hungry busybodies. It was a clean sweep, a complete and utter victory for the treehouse lovers, and for everyone who was just tired of the HOA's nonsense. And the treehouse? It became a permanent fixture of Willow Creek Estates, a symbol of resistance against overbearing HOAs, a testament to the power of creativity and individuality, and a reminder that sometimes the best way to fight conformity is with a really, really awesome treehouse. It became a local landmark, a source of community pride, and a destination for tourists and treehouse enthusiasts from all over. Property values continued to climb. Real estate agents proudly advertised the treehouse community, and Willow Creek Estates became known as the coolest, most unique suburb in the state. And me? Well, I became a local hero. The guy who stood up to the HOA and won. The guy who built the treehouse. The guy who brought a little bit of magic, and a whole lot of leaves, to Willow Creek Estates. And every time I looked out at my magnificent treehouse, nestled amongst the branches of my oak tree, I smiled. It was a small victory, maybe, but it was a victory nonetheless. And it was a victory that proved that even the most powerful HOA can't stand up to the power of a really, really awesome treehouse. So, let me get this straight, Edward said, looking over my very detailed sketch of the proposed middle finger hedge. You want me to trim your hedges into this? Exactly, I said, nodding enthusiastically. A giant middle finger, as big as possible, as detailed as possible. And most importantly, directed right at that house. I pointed across the street, towards Hortense Hightower's perfectly manicured and hedge-free residence. Edward stared at me for a moment, then burst out laughing. You're serious? Dead serious, I said. I have a situation with my HOA, and this is my response. Edward grinned. Mr. Miller, I love it. This is going to be the most epic hedge sculpture I've ever created, but are you sure about this? It's a bit direct. Direct is exactly what I'm going for, I said. I want it to be unmistakable. I want it to be unforgettable. I want it to be the most glorious, defiant, middle-finger hedge the world has ever seen. It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and I, Sam Miller, was reclining in my hammock, sipping lemonade and admiring my hedges. Yes, hedges. I know, it doesn't sound like the most exciting pastime, but I found a certain zen-like satisfaction in the slightly overgrown, slightly unruly state of my privet hedges. They weren't neglected, mind you, just relaxed, like me. They provided a nice privacy screen, a bit of shade, and a haven for the local bird population. In short, they were perfect. Of course, perfect is a subjective term, especially in Greenhaven Glades. Greenhaven Glades. The name conjured up images of rolling hills, lush meadows, and a general sense of natural beauty. The reality was a bit more controlled. Manicured lawns, identical houses, and an HOA with a rule book thicker than a Tolstoy novel. I'd always managed to stay mostly under the radar, content to enjoy my little slice of suburban, un-paradise. Until he showed up. He approached with the grim determination of a process server, clipboard clutched to his chest like a shield. He was a small, wiry man with a perpetually pinched expression and a name tag that read, Mr. Prickly, HOA Compliance Officer. Prickly by name, prickly by nature, it seemed. Mr. Miller? He asked, his voice as sharp and pointed as his neatly trimmed mustache. That's me, I said, slowly extracting myself from the hammock, a sense of impending doom settling over me. Something I can help you with? I'm here about your hedges, Mr. Prickly said, his eyes scanning my slightly overgrown privet with unconcealed disdain. They're in violation of community guidelines. Violation? I repeated, feigning innocence. How so? They're too tall, Mr. Miller, Mr. Prickly said, his voice tight with disapproval. They're unruly. They detract from the uniform aesthetic of Greenhaven Glades. He made it sound like my hedges were committing a crime against humanity, not just, growing. He also claims my hedges are blocking sunlight from reaching Miss Hightower's home. Uniform aesthetic? I countered, gesturing towards the rows of identical houses lining the street. You mean beige? Mr. Prickly ignored my comment. Section 4, Paragraph C, Subclause 7 of the Greenhaven Glades HOA Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, he recited, as if quoting scripture. Hedges must be maintained at a height not exceeding 4 feet and must be kept neatly trimmed at all times. They provide privacy, Mr. Prickly, I explained, trying to reason with him. And the birds like them. I've seen several nests in there. Birds, Mr. Prickly repeated, his nose wrinkling in disgust. Nesting in unruly hedges. Precisely the problem, Mr. Miller. I pointed out that there weren't actually any rules broken yet, but he gave me a warning anyways. It was clear that this wasn't going to be a rational conversation. Mr. Prickly was a drone, a rule enforcer, a man who probably measured his own grass with a micrometer. He handed me a warning notice, informed me that I had 2 weeks to remedy the situation, and marched off, his clipboard held high like a banner of bureaucratic triumph. I, Sam Miller, was officially at war with the HOA, over hedges. The HOA meeting was, as expected, a masterclass in pettiness
and power tripping. It was held in the Greenhaven Glades community room, a space that seemed to have been deliberately designed to be as sterile and unwelcoming as possible. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige everything. The board members sat at a long table, looking like a collection of disapproving garden gnomes. And presiding over them all was Hortense Hightower, the president of the Greenhaven Glades HOA and the undisputed queen of all things orderly and under control. She was an older woman, always impeccably dressed in a severe, businesslike suit, usually in some shade of gray or navy, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression a permanent mask of disapproval. She radiated an air of control and a deep-seated hatred of anything that deviated even slightly from her meticulously defined vision of suburban perfection. She was, in short, my nemesis. "Mr. Miller," Hortense began, her voice sharp and accusatory, "your hedges have been brought to our attention." She said hedges as if they were a particularly offensive species of venomous snake. "My hedges, Miss Hightower," I corrected, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable, "are perfectly healthy. They provide privacy, shelter for wildlife, and, I believe, a touch of natural beauty to the neighborhood." "They're eyesores, Mr. Miller," Hortense declared, her voice rising in pitch. "They're unneighborly. They're a blatant disregard for community standards." "They're hedges, Hortense," I repeated, my patience wearing thin. "Plants, green, leafy things, they grow. That's what they do." "They're attracting pests," she continued, ignoring my comment. "Squirrels, birds, and who knows what else might be lurking in those unruly bushes." "They're providing habitat, Hortense," I countered. "They're part of the ecosystem. And frankly, I enjoy watching the birds and squirrels." "They're lowering property values," she insisted. "They make the neighborhood look unkempt, uncivilized." She went on to announce her proposition. "A new rule will be voted on at the next meeting. It would place further restrictions on the height of hedges." I pointed out, yet again, that there weren't currently any rules being broken. The other board members, a collection of mostly middle-aged men and women who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few of them, I noticed, had slightly overgrown hedges visible from their own windows. Perhaps they were secret hedge rebels, yearning to break free from the tyranny of Hortense Hightower. But Hortense? She was unmoved. She was a woman on a mission to eradicate all traces of untamed nature from Greenhaven Glades. "The hedges, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dangerously low, "must be trimmed to a reasonable height. You have been warned." She slammed her gavel down, signaling the end of the discussion, and seemingly the end of my peaceful existence in Greenhaven Glades. I walked out of that meeting, my blood simmering, my sense of injustice reaching a boiling point. Hortense Hightower had declared war on my hedges, and I, Sam Miller, was not about to surrender. The official notice arrived a few days later, delivered with the solemnity of a death warrant. It was printed on thick, cream-colored paper, embossed with the Greenhaven Glades HOA logo. A perfectly manicured lawn, naturally, and filled with legalese that basically boiled down to one thing: trim your hedges or else. Hedges, the notice stated, must be maintained at a height not exceeding 3 feet. All hedges must be neatly trimmed and shaped, with no protrusions or irregularities. The deadline: 2 weeks. The penalty for non-compliance: a hefty fine, followed by further action up to and including forced landscaping services, which I imagined involved a team of HOA-approved landscapers descending upon my yard with chainsaws and a complete disregard for my personal preferences. 3 feet! My hedges were at least 6 feet tall, a glorious wall of green that provided privacy, shade, and a haven for birds. Trimming them to 3 feet would be butchery. It would be hedgicide. It would be unacceptable. My internal monologue was a colorful mix of outrage, disbelief, and a growing amusement at the sheer pettiness of it all. 3 feet? I muttered to myself. Seriously? They're measuring hedges now? What's next? A mandatory leaf count? I wasn't going to give in. Not to Hortense Hightower. Not to the HOA. Not to the tyranny of the perfectly trimmed hedge. I was going to fight back. But how? I needed a plan, a strategy, a way to comply with the letter of the law while utterly, completely, and hilariously violating its spirit. I paced my living room, my mind racing. I considered various options. Trimming the hedges into the shape of animals? Too cliché. Painting them bright pink? Too obvious. Spelling out HOA sucks in giant letters? Tempting, but probably illegal. Then I reread the notice again. The wording specified that the hedges had to be a certain height. It didn't say how I had to accomplish that. It did say it had to be neatly trimmed. A slow smile spread across my face. Neatly trimmed, I muttered. Oh, I'll give them neatly trimmed. They want them cut, I'll cut them. The plan, when it fully formed in my mind, was so audacious, so juvenile, so utterly perfect, that I burst out laughing. I wouldn't just trim my hedges, I'd sculpt them into something memorable, something unforgettable, something that would send a clear, unmistakable message to Hortense Hightower and the entire Greenhaven Glades HOA. I would trim my hedges into the shape of a giant middle finger. It was perfect, it was absurd, it was exactly the kind of ridiculous, over-the-top response that this situation demanded. It would be a massive, meticulously crafted, and utterly unsubtle act of topiary defiance. A green, leafy middle finger directed squarely at Hortense Hightower's house, which, conveniently, was located directly across the street from mine. I'd argue, of course, that I was technically complying with the HOA's order. I was trimming my hedges. I was reducing their overall height. Well, most of it anyway. And I was certainly creating a unique landscape feature. The overall height would be lower, even if certain protrusions were considerably taller. I could already picture Hortense's reaction, the sputtering outrage, the vein throbbing in her forehead, the inevitable screaming fit. It was a beautiful image. I knew it was childish. I knew it was probably going to escalate the conflict. But I didn't care. This wasn't just about hedges anymore. It was about principle. It was about freedom. It was about the right to, to express myself through strategically shaped shrubbery. Operation Flipping the Hedge was a go, and Greenhaven Glades was about to get a whole lot more interesting. My first challenge was finding someone to help me execute my vision. I needed a landscaper, yes, but not just any landscaper. I needed a topiary artist, a master of the hedge clippers, a Michelangelo of the privet. I found him online. His name was Edward, of course, and his website showcased an impressive portfolio of topiary creations. Giant animals, intricate geometric shapes, even a life-sized replica of the Eiffel Tower made entirely out of boxwood. He was clearly the man for the job. So, let me get this straight, Edward said, looking over my very detailed sketch of the proposed middle finger hedge. You want me to trim your hedges into this? Exactly, I said, nodding enthusiastically. A giant middle finger, as big as possible, as detailed as possible, and most importantly, directed right at that house. I pointed across the street towards Hortense Hightower's perfectly manicured and hedge-free residence. Edward stared at me for a moment, then burst out laughing. You're serious? Dead serious, I said. I have a situation with my HOA, and this is my response. Edward grinned. Mr. Miller, I love it. This is going to be the most epic hedge sculpture I've ever created, but are you sure about this? It's a bit direct. Direct is exactly what I'm going for, I said. I want it to be unmistakable. I want it to be unforgettable. I want it to be the most glorious, defiant, middle-finger hedge the world has ever seen. And so construction, or rather deconstruction, began. Edward, a true artist with a pair of hedge clippers, arrived with an arsenal of tools: electric shears, hand clippers, scaffolding, measuring tapes, and even a level. Apparently, even rebellious topiary requires precision. He surveyed my overgrown privet hedges with a critical eye, then nodded, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "This is going to be fun," he said. The trimming process was a slow, meticulous, and utterly fascinating spectacle. Edward worked with the skill of a surgeon, carefully shaping and sculpting the hedges, gradually transforming them from a shapeless green mass into a giant, unmistakable symbol of defiance. He started with the base of the finger, trimming the surrounding hedges down to the HOA-mandated 3-foot height. Then, he began to work on the finger itself, carefully shaping and pruning, stepping back frequently to assess his progress. It was like watching Michelangelo carve David, except instead of marble, he was working with privet, and instead of a Renaissance masterpiece, he was creating a giant, leafy middle finger. The neighbors, as expected, were captivated. They gathered on their lawns, watching the transformation with a mixture of shock, amusement, laughter, and a growing sense of, he did not just do that. I even saw a few of them taking pictures. I suspected my middle finger hedge was about to become a local legend. My internal monologue was a constant stream of giddy anticipation and triumphant pronouncements. "Take that, Hortense Hightower," I muttered to myself as the finger began to take shape. "Enjoy your uniform aesthetic now." I imagined her face, contorted with rage, her perfectly coiffed hair standing on end. It was a beautiful thought. There was, of course, a brief visit from Mr. Prickly, the HOA's ever-vigilant and increasingly stressed-out enforcer. "Mr. Miller?" he stammered, looking up at the partially sculpted hedge, his face a mask of horrified confusion. "What exactly is this?" "It's topiary, Mr. Prickly," I said with a perfectly straight face. "I'm trimming my hedges, as per the HOA's request." But it's..." he sputtered, clearly struggling to find the words. "It's a work in progress," I interrupted. "A landscape enhancement, a tribute to modern art." Mr. Prickly stared at me, then at the hedge, then back at me. He clearly had no idea what to do. He mumbled something about consulting with the board and retreated, looking utterly defeated. I, Sam Miller, had once again outmaneuvered the HOA, and my middle finger hedge, my monument to suburban rebellion, was nearing completion. The anticipation was almost unbearable. The neighborhood was buzzing, and I, for one, couldn't wait to see the final result. The unveiling of the Greenhaven salute, as I'd christened my topiary masterpiece, was a moment I'll cherish forever. It stood there, in my front yard, in all its leafy, defiant glory. A giant, unmistakable middle finger, meticulously sculpted from my, formerly, overgrown privet hedges. It was beautiful. It was absurd. It was the perfect embodiment of my contempt for Hortense Hightower and her ridiculous rules. And, as expected, Hortense's reaction was spectacular. She arrived, predictably, in a state of apoplectic fury, her face a mask of outrage, her perfectly coiffed hair, or what was left of it after my previous HOA battles, practically vibrating with indignation. She didn't even bother with the pretense of knocking. She just stormed onto my property, her heels clicking on the pavement like the hooves of an approaching apocalypse. "What?" she bellowed, her voice echoing through the previously peaceful neighborhood. "Have you done?" I emerged from behind the Greenhaven salute, a picture of calm serenity, holding a pair of gardening shears and wearing a t-shirt that read, "I break for topiary." "Good morning, Hortense," I said, my voice smooth and even. "You're admiring my hedge trimming, I presume?" "Hedge trimming?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the massive green digit. This is obscene. It's a giant hand, giving everyone the finger." "I trimmed my hedges, Hortense," I corrected, with a perfectly straight face, "as per your request, or rather, your demand. And as you can see, it's perfectly compliant with the height requirement. The overall height of the hedge has been significantly reduced. Although," I added with a mischievous grin, "certain parts may be a bit taller." You did this on purpose," she accused, her voice shaking with rage. You maniac." "I simply exercised my artistic license, Hortense," I said with a shrug. "And I must say I'm quite pleased with the result. It's bold, it's expressive, it's a statement." I paused for dramatic effect. "I call it the Greenhaven salute." "It's a disgrace," she sputtered, her face turning a shade of purple I'd previously only seen on overripe eggplants. It's offensive. It's going to traumatize the children." "I think the children find it quite amusing," I countered, gesturing towards a group of kids who were gathered on the sidewalk, giggling and pointing at the hedge. "And frankly, Hortense, I think it's a vast improvement over your aesthetic standards." Hortense opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. She just stood there, sputtering and fuming, her eyes fixated on the giant green middle finger that now dominated my front yard, and quite possibly her nightmares. I'll have this thing removed," she finally managed to choke out, her voice hoarse. "I'll sue you. You'll do nothing, Hortense," I said, my voice firm, "because as I've said before, I've followed the rules. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go. Admire my art." I turned and walked back towards the Greenhaven salute, leaving Hortense standing alone on my lawn, looking like a deflated and very angry balloon. The emergency HOA meeting, Part 2, the hedge hullabaloo, was, if possible, even more chaotic than the previous ones. Hortense, looking like she'd aged another 20 years in the past few days, presented her case with the fervor of a religious zealot. During that meeting, a new bylaw was added, specifying the shapes that were allowed. This obscene topiary," she declared, her voice shaking with emotion, "is an affront to everything Greenhaven Glades stands for. It's a safety hazard. It's an eyesore. It's going to corrupt the youth." She'd even brought in a child psychologist, a guy who looked suspiciously like her son, wearing a fake mustache and glasses, who testified about the negative psychological effects of obscene imagery on developing minds. Apparently, my hedge was going to turn all the children of Greenhaven Glades into, well, I'm not sure what, but it was definitely bad. Then it was my turn. "Miss Hightower," I began, addressing the board with a calm, reasonable demeanor that was, of course, completely fake, "seems to be under the impression that I've created this hedge sculpture solely to annoy her. While I admit that is a delightful side effect, my primary motivation was to comply with the HOA's directive to trim my hedges." I then presented my defense. I cited the previous bylaws, the ones that were in effect when I'd started my project, highlighting the fact that I had indeed trimmed my hedges. I presented photographs of the hedge from various angles, demonstrating that the overall height had been reduced, even if one particular section was taller. I argued that it was a form of artistic expression, protected by my freedom of speech. A bit of a stretch, I admit, but I was going for broke. And, just for good measure, I'd brought along my own expert. A local art critic, actually a friend of mine who wrote for a small online magazine, who testified about the bold symbolism of my hedge, its subversive commentary on suburban conformity, and its unintentional comedic brilliance. Mr. Miller's hedge, the critics declared with a perfectly straight face, is a masterpiece of modern topiary. It's a statement. It's a challenge. It's art. The other board members were, to put it mildly, divided. Some were clearly still loyal to Hortense, but their support was rapidly eroding. Others looked confused, overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of the situation. And a few, I suspected, were secretly finding the whole thing hilarious. Then, a woman from the back of the room stood up. She was a landscape architect, a resident of Greenhaven Glades I'd spoken to briefly during the hedge trimming process. "I have to disagree with Miss Hightower," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I think Mr. Miller's hedge is remarkable. It's certainly unique. And dare I say it, it's kind of brilliant. It's technically impressive, artistically expressive, and, well, it's made me laugh every time I've driven past it." That was the final blow. The board, facing a potential lawsuit, a public relations nightmare, and the growing realization that Hortense had completely lost it, voted to do nothing. They couldn't even agree on new rules. The meeting ended in chaos, with Hortense screaming about the decline of civilization and the rise of obscene topiary, and me, Sam Miller, the hedge sculpting rebel, walking out with a smug, but well-deserved, I thought, smile on my face. But Hortense, like a particularly persistent and well-fertilized weed, wasn't about to give up. What followed was a period of escalating absurdity that I can only describe as the hedge war. Hortense, obsessed with getting rid of the Greenhaven salute, or, at the very least, making my life miserable, tried every tactic she could think of. She filed complaints with the city, claiming it was a zoning violation, a safety hazard, and a public nuisance. The city inspectors came, they inspected, and they found nothing. My hedge was perfectly legal. She tried to organize a neighborhood petition to have it removed. She went door to door, armed with her clipboard and her "think of the children" speech, trying to convince people that my hedge was a threat to their property values and their moral well-being. The petition failed miserably. Most people either politely declined to sign or slammed the door in her face. Some even signed a counter-petition I'd created, praising the hedge as a work of art and a symbol of neighborhood spirit. She even, I suspect, attempted some minor acts of vandalism. I found a few, easily removed, "Keep Greenhaven Glades Beautiful" signs stuck in the ground near the hedge. And one morning, I woke up to find the finger mysteriously covered in toilet paper. Apparently, she was hoping to make it look less offensive. I'm not sure what her logic was there. Of course, I had security cameras everywhere, capturing her every move. And I, of course, responded in kind. Not with vandalism, oh no, I was above that. I responded with enhancements. I added landscape lighting to illuminate the Greenhaven salute at night, spotlights strategically placed to highlight its majestic form. It was like a beacon, a giant, leafy middle finger glowing in the darkness, visible for miles, or at least from Hortense's bedroom window. I installed a bird bath at the base of the finger, A small ceramic bowl filled with water, with a little sign that read, "Birds welcome. HOA presidents not so much." I created a hedge viewing platform, a small raised deck, complete with comfortable chairs and a telescope, perfect for admiring my topiary masterpiece, and for keeping an eye on Hortense. And because why not, I hosted a Hedge Appreciation Day party. I invited all the neighbors, except Hortense naturally, put up decorations, balloons, streamers, and a banner that read, "Long live the hedge," and served refreshments, including finger sandwiches, get it? The local news showed up, filming a segment about the ongoing feud between a homeowner and his HOA, and the giant middle finger hedge that's dividing a neighborhood. It was a glorious, ridiculous, utterly over-the-top spectacle. I even started selling tickets for people to come view it and take pictures. And with each passing day, with each new escalation, I could feel Hortense's frustration growing, her power waning, her sanity slipping. The hedge had become more than just a sculpted bush. It was a symbol of defiance, a testament to the power of creative and slightly unhinged resistance. And I, Sam Miller, the accidental topiary artist, was winning.